No, we don't. I would take the chat off.
Yeah, without being able to see anything. So tell them not to put.
We should be able to hear it.
Looks good on this end.
Thanks. Oh, now there's, Lord of mercy, I don't know where sound is coming from.
Yeah, I can hear that.
Yeah, I don't know what we've got going on. Anyway, we heard you, Whit, and I'm trusting that you're able to hear us.
Yes, 10-4.
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Okay. All right. Well, glad everyone is here again, both remotely and here in the chapel. I think we're getting this figured out, how to do these things so that you got good video and good audio. Sounds like we've got a little bit more to work on the audio. So today we're talking about Islam, and we'll start as we have the last few weeks with kind of how I got introduced to Islam and the various places and ways, and then we'll watch a video and then turn it over to Bishop Epting. So most of my introduction came through campuses, through my work on various college campuses. And the first place that really happened was when I was the Episcopal campus minister at UC Berkeley, and I was getting to know some folks. I started there in 1996. I was getting to know some of the people there, but not really well. Hatem Bazian, who is the face sort of right there in the middle, is a faculty member at Cal, and we really got to know each other after 9/11. So that was the sort of the catalyst for a lot of conversations, so that was where that sort of, it didn't go much in depth. It was just that we were colleagues working to sort of tamp down the tensions on UC Berkeley's campus, where there was a very, very active Hillel and a very, very active Arab, they had two groups. There was the Islamic Studies Circle, and then there was the Muslim Association or something. They were two different groups, and it was a challenge. But then I came to DU, and of course my responsibilities at the University of Denver were with all of the religious groups. I wasn't just representing the Episcopal Church. I was there to work with all of the religious groups, and quickly became friends with and colleagues with a number of folks in the Muslim community in Denver. And the first one was Liaquat Takim, who is up there in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. Liaquat, when I got here, was the faculty member at DU, who was the Islamic faculty member. And he also served as the advisor to the Muslim Student Association or Muslim Student Union. And he was wonderful. He was wonderful. The students loved him. He was a great colleague, and he was Canadian and decided to go back to McMaster. And so we lost Liaquat. And what I didn't know, well, I kind of knew, but it didn't really occur to me, is when the religion department was looking for a replacement for Liaquat, they said, this time we have to get a Sunni, because Liaquat was a Shiite. And a variety of folks who were in the Muslim community in Denver said, we've got to get a Sunni. And it was just so fascinating to me to hear that. I mean, we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then two of the other folks that I got to know, because they were part of an interfaith group that I facilitated, I called them there on the screen, the Mohammeds. One was Mohammed Joda, who's there in the lower left-hand corner. And the other one was a gentleman by the name of Nabil Hamdi. And after 9/11, he reassumed his first name of Muhammad. And he was a graduate of DU and was a librarian, Mohammed Nabil Hamdi. Mohammed Joda and Mohammed Hamdi both were founding members of the big mosque there on Parker. And Mohammed Joda was a chaplain at the correctional facility down in Canyon City, doing all sorts of stuff. Very, very wonderful interfaith colleagues. Mohammed Joda died maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And the last I heard anything about Muhammad Hamdi, he was not doing very well. But very, very active members of the Muslim community in Denver, especially that mosque over on Parker. One of the other groups that I became familiar with in Denver is the Mosaic Multicultural Foundation. And down in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see a gentleman by the name of Ismail Akbulut, and this photo of a bunch of folks eating. The Mosaic Multicultural Foundation was founded by a Turk who the government in Turkey does not like. And he's living sort of in exile in the United States. And they are all about, the Mosaic Multicultural Foundation are all about interfaith understanding. And their gathering place is over off of kind of in that little triangle where Parker and Hamden meet, between Hamden, Parker, and 225. And they do conversations, they do cooking class, or they did before COVID, they did cooking classes that my wife went to a couple of times. We went to some of their dinners and conversations. They were wonderful, wonderful folks. And then many folks have run across in one way or another, Ibu Patel, who is in the bottom center. Ibu founded the Interfaith Youth Corps, and he said, yes, core, C-O-R-E, not core, C-O-R-P-S. He wanted it to be at the core of everything. It wasn't this group of folks who were a core. And it's located in Chicago and really, really active on college campuses with smaller groups in some high schools. He's written a book, I think it was called Acts of Faith. He's a very, very prolific and prominent speaker. I've met him at a conference, really, really delightful guy. And when I was at DU, we did some work with the Interfaith Youth Corps at the university. And then you may notice that all of those folks are male. But I got to know a number of very, very active women in Islam as well. And they were as much a sort of a part of my formation in terms of thinking about Islam as anybody else. And the first one was Ingrid Mattson, who's there in the center. I went to a conference of the Association for Religion and Intellectual Life, which no longer exists. It published a journal called Cross Currents. And I think it was, I know it was at Drew University in New Jersey. And I can't remember which airport we flew into, whether it was into Philadelphia or if it was into Newark, but I was told that I was supposed to travel to Drew with this woman who was going to be a sort of the Muslim speaker. I said, okay. So I'm waiting around and she walks up and I put out my hand to shake her hand and she goes, no. She said, my name's Ingrid Mattson. My students call me the Scarf Lady because of her hijab. And she was the president of the Islamic Society of North America.
Wow.
So, you know, this is not somebody who was not well respected in the Muslim community. And she may have been the first to be that. She's doing other things now. I'm still obviously very connected. In the upper right-hand corner is Tahira Ahmad. She was an associate chaplain at Northwestern University and still is, I think. And one of the first Muslim chaplains in higher education. And I got to know her through some of my my connections, my interfaith and national connections. She was the first woman to lead, I can't remember if it was lead prayers or recite the Quran at an annual meeting of the Islamic Society of North America. And there is in Islam a pretty large and active community of folks who don't think that it's just men who have to lead the prayers. And she's very much involved in that. Last time I saw her was at the Parliament of the World's Religions in Salt Lake City 8 or 9 years ago. And then down in the lower left-hand corner is Muhammad Joda's daughter, Ayman Joda, who I got to know really pretty well in these interfaith interactions that I had because of the University of Denver. She ran for and is now the first Palestinian female Muslim representative to the Colorado House of Representatives. And she represents a good chunk of Aurora. Really, really smart, dynamic young woman. And she was the public affairs person for the mosque on Parker Avenue. So well-spoken, thoughtful, engaged. And again, all three of these women stand in stark contrast to what I think a lot of Americans hear about women in Islam. Very, very dynamic. And then the last piece is that I thought, well, I should probably read the Quran. I highly recommend it. So I found this book that's down there in the lower left-hand corner, the Study Quran, because I'm not going to read it without some notes. And this was really a fabulous introduction to the Quran. And what I decided to do, and I think that if I remember correctly, the video talks about how the Quran was formed, but you can start at the beginning and go to the end, but the way that the Quran is assembled, it's from the shortest to the longest surahs or chapters, the shortest one to the longest. So there's hardly any rhyme or reason other than short to long. And I decided I was going to read it in chronological order. So the Quran, I don't think he mentions this, the various surahs or chapters of the Quran were revealed to Moses over a course, or Moses, to Muhammad over the course of time. And I wanted to read it in the order that they were revealed. And so I was jumping back and forth in the Quran. I had to find a place where I could get all of those. And that was really interesting because some of the things that we hear about Islam don't show up early on in the revelation. They show up later on. And you really learn about how Muhammad in the early Muslim community was struggling in its own time and place against folks who were in opposition to it. So all of those things, and obviously I've maintained some good connections with some of these people, but those were sort of my introductions to Islam. I've been to both the Parker Mosque. There's a mosque that you would never know was there on Birch and Evans, just to the west of the Evans Avenue exit off of I-25. There was a Shiite mosque on Hampton, just off of I-25. I think they've moved. So we do have at least one Shiite mosque in Denver. There are several other Sunni mosques scattered around town as well. And we have one gathering that's primarily Black Muslims who are Sunni, and that's in North Denver, not surprisingly. So there are these groups gathered around Denver. So we can come back to that a little bit later, but now I think we'll go and have Dr. Matut.
Matut. He's a retired physician.
And I hope we can hear this. Come on. Come on. It's there.
It takes a minute to load, I think. Yeah.
Okay, it's up there.
This is at the keyboard center
Yeah,
again.
we can't hear.
Okay.
This is what we mean. The term in Arabic language is Allah. Like in Hebrew, it is Yahweh, I think this is Yiddish, or Jehovah, or what have you. But in the Arab world, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, when they talk about God, they say Allah. Our Christians friend, lots of them are called Abdullah, because this is the word. If you open the Bible, Arabic translation, you will find Allah. So the notion that this is a different God is a false notion. So it is one God, one family, and one message. And the message simply, since articulated clearly by Abraham, because the message predated Abraham, was believe in God and do good. As simple as that. Everything else is a commentary. God is free of needs, so you don't need to do good to God. You do good to the vulnerable, the needy, the deficient, and the disadvantaged. So if you wanted to worship God or to be close to God, is to serve his servants, his subjects, his children, particularly those who are vulnerable. Without that, there is no religion. The highest authority in Islam is the Quran. No authority can get above that, including the Prophet and what he said, and the companions, and the mullahs and sheikhs and whatever imams now. The Quran said clearly, let there be no compulsion in religion. In other words, nobody should be compelled to follow a certain religion. Quran becomes more clear when it says, whoever wants to believe should believe, whoever wants to deny faith should deny. Because all will go back to God in the day of judgment, and he will settle these affairs. Even Orientalist scholars who studied the history and the evolution of the Quran, the consensus is, you will find exceptions, but the consensus is Muhammad received the Quran from somewhere higher. And he got these verses, according to the Quran, sink in his heart and his mind. And he gets out and tells his followers, I received this. And he recites it. Some of them wrote it, some of them memorized it. The Arabian community at that time was illiterate community. Muhammad himself was illiterate when it comes to reading and writing. So they wrote it and they stored it in the house of a woman called Hafsa. She have been entrusted to keep this thing there. They memorize things, and their major art is poetry. And poetry, of course, is memorized. So they did not need these writings until in one event, in one battle, 70 people of those who memorized the Quran were killed. This was during the successor of Muhammad. So the people got very worried that we might lose the Quran. So they said, let us collect it. So it was collected and written. But still it was not bound in a book. By the end of this period, which is about maybe 25 years after, or 20 years after the death of Muhammad, they bound it in a book. All the scientific debate is about the source. Is it from God? Or is it from a monk who dictated it to him? Or is it from Muhammad himself? So the origin, of course, you find people who are atheist persuasion, they cannot accept that something came from God, neither in case of Islam, Judaism, or Christianity. Others who are particular people, what we call them people of the book, means Christians and Jews, the idea was not far-fetched for them. God is one and unique, and nothing is like unto him. So he cannot be like my wife who begot two children. It cannot be like anything we know, so we take these things as allegorical or spiritual or whatever, but we will never acknowledge that Jesus said, I am the biological only Son of God. And this is what makes Christians Christians and Muslims Muslims. We don't have to believe the same. Jesus was not described only as a prophet or as a messenger. He's described as the Spirit and Word of God given to the Virgin Mary. We look at Jesus Christ as the Word of God, and by the way, all of us, in a sense, are words of God, but he's the pure Word of God, if you will, and he's a spirit from him to the Virgin Mary so that he establishes the values that he lived his life for, the value of love and of justice and compassion, etc. So Jesus occupies a very important spot in our hearts and in our text. Every, and I mean every, Islamic organization or institution in the world very loudly condemned terrorism. For about 10 years now, I stopped classifying people into Christians, Muslims, and Jews, or moderate and extremist, or progressive, or traditional. People are either stupid or intelligent. And that goes really across the board. So everywhere we'll find people who are stupid. So part of our struggle is to correct this lopsided interpretation. And remember that the commentators on the Quran and the jurists for a long time have been males. And naturally, males, chauvinistic, but from a patriarchal tribal society, their brain is framed to think in a certain way. We have to challenge that. I'm just imploring people that we should not fight with each other. If anything, we need each other. Let us fight against the powers of ignorance and darkness that you will find trying to control and to hijack all religions. What we are trying to do at Impact and at the Islamic Center is to put the alternative, the message itself, what Islam really is about, and what Islam says about love and about cooperation and about trying to build a better future. And we are really emphasizing to the point of being boring that don't worship God except by serving his children. Anything else is a ballet dance or even a belly dance. It is just a show. I believed in a different way of going to God, that I communicate with him directly, and I'll try to serve in life, trying to promote, or intend to promote at least, because sometimes we don't control events, but definitely you can control intentions, to serve his cause. Other will believe that God gave us a special favors as long as we are upholding to the message, and so on. And other believes in nirvana, other believes in Buddha, other, whatever. What concerns me as a human being is what kind of life we live together, because we are stuck. We are stuck together on this very shrinking small planet. And guess what? If we believe in the day of judgment and eternity, most probably we'll be stuck at eternity also. So there's no way out. So we better be smart and find a way that our religions will lead us to what kind of life we should live together.
Well, I'm sorry about the audio.
That's okay. We could hear it. Just had to turn it up.
Yeah, we heard it.
You heard it, yeah, but the people in here could not. It was really, really really soft. And what I was going to say is that this recording will be made available, the recording of this session, so you'll be able to go, if you want, go back and watch and hear that. What Dr. Matut didn't emphasize in quite the same way that Prothero did, but I want to make sure that we're in the same sort of schema here, is the problem for Islam, and you can listen to the Prothero, is pride or self-reliance, that we think we can do everything. And that's what besets the human condition. And so the solution to that is submission to God, complete submission. And so it's very simple, pride and submission. How do you submit? The techniques are very simple. They're the 5 pillars that you can elaborate on those. And Bishop Epting will talk more about the 5 pillars of Islam. And who is the exemplar? Muhammad. Dr. Matut, says he's not divine. It was revealed to Muhammad. And the Quran is the key, not Muhammad. The Quran is the key, not Muhammad's actions, not Muhammad's teachings. It's the Quran that's the key, and all of the rest of this is commentary. But that Muhammad was sort of the exemplar of following Islam. So again, we'll get into more of this in just a minute. But I wanted to just sort of show that the slide showing kind of Islam is not monolithic at all. Very early on in the history of Islam, after Muhammad's death, it divided into the 2 major groups, the Shia and the Sunni. And there's a chart on the next slide that will kind of talk about that. And then they began to filter out and move in different directions. And you'll see in the middle of that, there are some that sort of lopped back and forth, the chief of which would be the Sufi tradition, the mystical tradition that moved back and forth pretty easily between the Sunni and the Shia, that had people on both sides. On the left-hand side of your screen, kind of in the middle, you'll see, and it's not, the yellow didn't show up very well on the screen, Ismaili. That's a pretty active group of Muslims, and Ibn Patel, that I mentioned, was an Ismaili on the Shia side. But well-respected outside of the Shia community. Down in the bottom right, you'll see a couple of other groups that you probably wouldn't know unless you're paying a lot of attention to the news, and that's the Salafis and the Wahhabis. Pretty conservative Sunnis, well represented in Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia has a lot of money that they like to fund Muslim student associations with. And so there are some campuses that are really concerned about this influx of a lot of money coming into the Muslim Student Association from this very conservative Saudi Arabian side of the Muslim tradition. So it's bigger than just the Sunnis and the Shias, even though that's probably what we mostly hear about this. And then just before I turn it over here is, you might be surprised to know that, if you didn't, that the country with the largest population of Muslims is Indonesia. And if you look at that chart, this is from like 2009, you don't see Saudi Arabia on that chart. That's where Mecca and Medina are, and so this is just fascinating to see where all of these countries are, where the large populations in terms of numbers of Muslims are, and to think about how our politics are governed not by that group of Muslims, but by a group of Muslims in the southern Middle East. And when you talk to Indonesians and Pakistanis who are Muslim, their concerns about the state of Israel are nowhere near as anxious as the concerns of those who are in the Middle East. And so it's just fascinating. The chart on the right, you can see the differences between the Sunnis and the Shia. What happened was when Muhammad died, who's the successor? Who's going to carry things on? This is always the problem when the founder of a religion dies. And so on the Sunni side, it was the teachings of Muhammad and the most capable sort of leader who would become the head of Islam. On the Shia side, they said, no, it should be a blood relative. And so it went to Ali, actually his son-in-law, but close enough to blood related. And so the Shias, which is Shia Ali, the followers of Ali, are that one side, and are primarily found in Iraq, in Iran, and Bahrain, and only form a small portion of the Islamic world. But again, because they were hugely predominant in Iran and Iraq, with whom the United States has had troubled relationships, we tend to sort of think that there are more of them out there than there are, but really it's the Sunni world. And when you start to narrow down the Sunni world into the ones that we have issues with, it's primarily those in Saudi Arabia. So that's, I love down the bottom right-hand corner, the Sunnis claim that the Shias have distorted the meaning of the various passages in the Quran, and the Shia think the Sunnis have distorted various passages in the Quran.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bishop Epting.
Thanks. Great background. Sadly, my introduction to any kind of serious engagement with Islam was when those two planes slammed into the World Trade Center in New York. I was there working at the church center headquarters at 815 2nd Avenue. We were in the chapel, Christ the Lord, saying morning prayers we did every day, and somebody burst through the doors and said, a plane just hit the World Trade Center. And so we finished our prayers quickly and prayed for those who might have been hurt, assuming, like most people did, that maybe it was an accident or a suicide or one thing or another. Made our way back to the office and to our break room where there was a television, and like the rest of you, we watched the rest of the day while one plane, then another, hit the Trade Center, and the one tower fell, and then another. And we heard about Pentagon, and we heard about Pennsylvania. We were locked in, couldn't do anything. The only difference was that we could look down from our office windows on 2nd Avenue, about an hour and a half or so, and see people walking up 2nd Avenue covered with ash, and dazed, just trying to walk home or find a way to get home, and everything was shut down, of course. So I can go on forever about that day or the weeks that followed, but I want to focus in on Islam. Soon after that, within a matter of hours, I guess, certainly a matter of a day, my phone started ringing off the hook, because we still had those kind of phones in those days. From bishops and priests all around the country. I was the interfaith officer. I think most of you know that, and they said, we keep getting calls from our people saying, who are these people and why do they hate us? We don't know how to answer the question. Do you have any resources? Can you help us with this? Well, we had almost nothing. We had not done much with Islam. We had done more with the Jews, and ecumenical work with other Christians, but we just were really caught flat-footed in a lot of ways. We were worried that there would be backlash violence against Muslims across the country, of course, knowing intuitively that this wasn't all Muslims that were involved. And so we wanted to help people understand that and some of the differences that we've just talked about. But it took a while to put those kind of things together. Of course, there was backlash, as you know, from some Muslims and even Sikhs who were, because they wore a turban, were thought to be Muslims for some reason. And so there was some of that. But I think, we were helped by President Bush. You may recall, he said very early on, this is not a war against Islam. And numbers of leaders across the country said that this was a different thing. And so I think some of that was tamped down, but hopefully some of the education that we and other churches and synagogues and mosques were able to do across the country in the wake of 9/11 helped that to be as little perhaps as it was. Could have been a lot worse, I think. So we knew we had to put together some stuff. I had run across a woman named Dr. Lucinda Mosier, whose picture is up there. She was finishing up her THD, which is a Doctor of Theology at the General Seminary in New York. Our seminary there, the Episcopal Seminary, doing a lot of cross-registration with other places of education in New York. And her doctorate was in moral ethics and interfaith relations. And so she was just an ideal person to come and help us. And after I begged her on my knees to do that, she agreed to come on board as a kind of unpaid staff person. And then we paid her later. And help put together, first of all, a website. And again, we were pretty much in the early days of trying to use this kind of technology in 2001, as you remember, but we did have a pretty decent website that people could go to and get resources to do a class like this or some kind of interaction in congregations. One of the first things we were able to put together, and we didn't do it, the National Council of Churches was able to republish a book called God is One. And it's written by a man named Marston Spate, it was written in 89, but it had been hailed by Christians and Jews as a very good resource. Like a lot of this kind of stuff, it has sort of gone out of fashion after it was originally published. So the NCC in 2001 was able to get this thing republished and available to those who could find out about it. The trouble is always getting the word out that these resources are available, but many dioceses and congregations did use this resource. We started putting together a website, as I said, and putting together various kinds of material, which ultimately, in a much slimmer volume, we were able to publish as the Episcopal Church, called the Interfaith Education Initiative, a manual on interfaith dialogue. So it had some principles. It had how you might put together an interfaith prayer service if you were so bold or silly to try to do. Those are always difficult, but those kinds of resources were there. And in order to launch this, we were able to put together a conference at the National Cathedral. There was a National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., as you know. It sort of serves as a house of prayer for all people. They're always very open to things like this. And at that time, there was something called the College of Preachers, which was hooked on to the National Cathedral. It was a continuing education resource and center. So that we used that center, we put together a conference, and we brought together about 125 or so clergy, lay people, teachers, other people who were interested, all Episcopalians from across the country, to do this particular conference. It was called Charged to Do What Is Right and Just. And we had 4 keynote speakers in that conference. Claire Amos was one. She was from London, from the Anglican Church of England. She was a coordinator for the Network of Interfaith Concerns for the Anglican Communion, NIFCON. We have to have all these, acronyms. So Claire spoke, and then Wesley Ariadja, who is a professor of ecumenical theology at Drew University, which has been a great interfaith center for a long time. Diana Eck from Harvard, Harvard's Pluralism Project. She was one of our speakers. And then a man named Shanta Primawardana, who was the National Council of Churches Associate Secretary for Interfaith Relations. So those 4 keynote people were just absolutely wonderful and powerful. The real meat of the conference was those 125 people were then broken up into small groups. And the questions were, what are you doing in your parish or community around interfaith relations? Number 2, what challenges have you encountered in your work? Number 3, what future plans do you have to sustain that kind of relationship? Wonderful, rich conversations that took place during that 2-day conference. It was actually September 30 to October 2nd of 2002. Then there were interactive workshops. The Interfaith Alliance put on a workshop. They're a kind of a political group that works across religions lines. The Interfaith Conference of Washington, D.C., which is like a conference of churches, but it's interfaith. And then URI was there, the United Religions Initiative from San Francisco, Bishop Swing. He was not there, but representatives from URI were there. And then we had 3 teams of Jews, Christians, and Muslims from 3 different places in the country: Dearborn, Michigan, Abilene, Texas, and Cedar Rapids, Iowa. There was a Jew, a Muslim, and a Christian who were involved in some kind of interfaith work. We thought it was important to try to model, you don't have to live in New York or Los Angeles to do interfaith work. And so we brought people from the heartland, if you will. Of course, I was in Iowa, so that was part of it. But, Dearborn, Michigan has been a real center for interfaith work as well. But Abilene, Texas, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And so these teams were very, very well received and thought brought a lot to the conference. That's really enough. I want to leave time for discussion. I do want to say something about the five pillars, if you will, of Islam and how they relate to us. This has not been a class in comparative religions, but as we shift to Christianity next week, I thought it might be helpful to think about, there are some similarities in these religions. There are some things that go across lines. The first pillar of Islam is the confession of faith. There is no God, but I witness that there is no deity except God, and Muhammad is God's messenger. Pretty simple creed. Ours is, you have to memorize ours. It's pretty clear. And really, Islam is a simple religion. It really is quite simple. It's, believe in the one God, do right in the world, and wait to go to paradise. I mean, it's really, doctrinally, at least, it's very simple. Hard to live up to or live into. But the first pillar is the confession of faith. Well, we have our own confession of faith, don't we? Gary and I, and those of us who pray morning prayer every day, say the Apostles' Creed every day. Every Sunday when we come to church, we say the Nicene Creed. And so we're reminding ourselves of the core essence of our belief, just like Muslims do in this first pillar. The second pillar that I have listed on here is prayer. And that's the one that's, of course, most recognizable to us, I guess. We know that Muslims pray several times a day and that they assume different postures. They pray 5 times a day. Devout Muslims, not all Muslims do. Not all Christians pray twice a day or once a day. But we know that. But devout Muslims pray 5 times a day, at dawn, at noon, in the mid-afternoon, at sunset, and at night. It's what we call in the Christian tradition a sanctification of time. It makes time holy if you stop, if you pause periodically during the day to pray. And again, we have a way to do that. We have morning and evening prayer in our Book of Common Prayer. In fact, now we have 4 offices in the Book of Common Prayer. There's a morning prayer service, a very short service for noonday. There's an evening prayer service for Vesper time, and Compline, which we're all familiar with here at Good Shepherd, good night prayers. So, they pray 5 times a day. We could pray 4 times a day if we were to follow that kind of basic pattern. I think we see them prostrate and, hands behind the ears and all of that they use the body in a way that we sometimes don't do. I think we've even gotten away from that to some degree in the Church Catholic and the Episcopal Church. We used to, we stand to praise, sit to learn, kneel to pray. And we don't always do that now. We do it pretty much, but I've often thought we've sometimes simplified our ceremonial to the point where we've gotten away from using our bodies as much. But whenever we make the sign of the cross, or we hold our hands up, or we do kneel or bow at the name of Jesus, or when the cross comes by in the aisle, those are the kinds of things that I think help us pray in a more full way if we use our bodies. And Catholic Christianity, used in the broad sense, has been more attentive to that than Protestants who kind of forgot a lot of those things in the Reformation times. So prayer using our entire bodies. A third pillar is contributions to charity, the zakat, which is a certain percentage of income given away.
Actually, it's assets.
That's right. That's right. It's not just
every
income.
year it's a percentage of assets,
it's what you
not
have
income.
Total, right. It's like 2.5%, but there's 2.5% of assets, not 2.5% of income daily, weekly. We're challenged to give a tithe or something like that away. And so again, we have this sense of that it's incumbent upon the believer to share what we have. This particular zakat is given specifically to the poor and to the needy. It is not something that supports an institution like a mosque. And many of us give a tithe of 10% or more, and we don't give it all to Good Shepherd. Hopefully a lot of it comes here, but we give to charities, we give to good things, we give to things that we think might rejoice the heart of Jesus. And that's, again, something that the Muslims are very, very serious about. Fasting, of course, is something we share in common. They're really serious about it, however. Ramadan is the month of fasting, and as you know, they refrain from eating or drinking during the daylight hours for a month, a solid month. And that's a little more of a challenge than us giving up chocolate for 40 days or even alcohol or something that particular type of food that we like. I tried to do that one Lent, do that fast. I made it about a week and it's tough, going without any food or water for the daylight hours, and then you have a feast in the evening when you break the fast. And then finally, another thing that is known pretty easily by us is the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, to the holy places. Muslims are expected to try at least to make that once in a lifetime at least. Some do it more, some don't make it at all, but many do. And a pilgrimage is something that is deep in our tradition as well. The first time I went to the Holy Land, I can't tell you how powerful it was. I've never felt more at home in a place than when I went to Jerusalem and the Holy Land for that first time. I think that's just because I had grown up and reading about it and hearing about it and thinking about it and praying with it. I just felt like I'd arrived at home. And I'm sure that's the way a Muslim feels when they arrive there. But pilgrimages don't have to be to the Holy Land. We can make a pilgrimage to, for us to Canterbury Cathedral is another holy place in England. Rome, I've been to the Vatican, and that seems to be a place of home as well for us. It's still part of our background. Even a pilgrimage to the National Cathedral in Washington or our own cathedral can be a kind of holy movement. And we've done pilgrimages to the outdoor places like altars in the wilderness and in the world. It's just an intentional journey to go to a thin place, a place where we might experience God in a way that we haven't before. So I think there are similarities, and we need to capitalize on those, and not to say they're the same. Certainly our theology is not the same at its core, but there are indeed similarities and things we can build upon in dialogue and in interaction. So that's all for me.
All of the photos, Bishop Epting took.
Yeah.
So unlike many of the others in the past that I've sucked off of the web, he took all of this. Which mosque is this?
It's a mosque, I don't remember the name, it's in Jerusalem, and they're such holy places. They're quiet, they're cool. You're going out of the sun, and a lot of them are open, and there's this rich carpet, and so it's a holy place.
Mm-hmm. So, question. I'm gonna stop share so that we can have more pictures of folks. But questions?
All I can say is there's too much to unpack here.
Yeah, not enough time.
I've heard a lot of people say that within the next
Just from the video, I mean, there were statements that he made in the video that I would like to explore.
Yeah. Go ahead and finish, Whit, and then Jim was starting to say something.
I said there's 2 or 3 statements in the video that he said that I'd like to explore. I think we probably need another hour on Islam.
Okay, Jim.
I've heard a lot of people say that within the next 10 years that the Islam will become the major religion in the world in terms of numbers. Comments?
It's growing. There's no question about that.
Yeah, it seems. Yeah.
I mean, we're still number one, but I'm not sure how close it is now. And of course, it's so hard to count because you have, they don't always do parochial report forms in the mosque, and so how you figure out how many that are actually there, I don't know. But it is certainly on the ascendancy in lots of places. Yeah,
in the audio, the podcast that we didn't use this time with Stephen Prothero, he's asked a question very similar to that, and why he thought that was, and his answer was partly is that it's just so simple.
Yeah,
it's just so simple. Belief in one God and do good. That's pretty simple. And again, I think we see Islam through the lenses of our political issues. That we forget how it probably is observed in Indonesia or Pakistan or some of these other places, because we tend to focus on how it's spelled out in the Middle East. But the mosque on Birch Street, just off of Evans, has a very different flavor than the mosque on Parker. And you know, if you go into a mosque, you'll see people from every ethnic background. It's much more diverse than any church that you will ever see.
Yeah.
But I was asking one of the imams at the mosque on Birch, and he said, yeah, we get the Uber drivers because they can just sort of pop right in, right off the freeway in terms of their day.
Do their prayers.
And a lot of them tend to be South Asian.
Yeah.
And the mosque on Parker tends to be much more Middle Eastern. So it's just, they take up these different characteristics.
I think there's two attraction for people of color and African Americans, particularly because Christianity is sometimes seen as a white man's religion, and it looks it almost Sunday mornings. Clearly, it's not. It comes out of a non-white background, but it's sometimes seen as the oppressor's religion or the white man's religion. And Islam does have a concern for the poor and a sense that everyone is welcome and accepted. There seems to be very little in the way of sort of hierarchy of class in the mosque. Yeah.
And it's a world
As an academic,
not the oppressor that Christianity was in the various colonizations.
Right. Right.
Whit, did I hear you?
yeah, but I didn't want to interrupt her.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
As an academic study, this is all sounds really neat and benign in terms of what some of us have learned to believe about Islam. Two surprises from the talk on the video were that the Quran says you're not compelled to believe. That's a surprise to me, since people were killed by the other sects because they did not worship in the same manner, or couldn't explain that very well to those holding the guns. And also, the other statement that jumped out at me was, all sects of Islam condemn the terrorists. I don't think that's true.
Well, let me take the first one. I'll let Bishop Epting take the second one.
Sure.
With regard to the first one, Whit, I would say that probably I agree. We don't hear that, just like in the same way that probably lots of non-Christians wouldn't necessarily pay attention to things that the Bible said when they see Christians saying "convert or die." You know, so is it in the text, or is it in the way that humans, I don't want to say interpret the text, but in the way that humans exert their power and justify it? So yeah, that it's there. I remember reading it.
Well, and I do remember the history about the Crusades, yes.
Yeah, you want to take the other one?
Yeah, well, just to say that because it's so complex, I don't know what the doctor was referring to specifically. He may mean sort of the official stance of the various groups condemned terrorism. Clearly, there were people in Islam who applauded it and thought it was fine. It's just so diverse as we are. You can look at texts like we heard about this morning, love your enemies. And then there's text in the Bible where, you know, God tells the Israelites to slaughter their enemies. So a lot of it's what you cherry pick, and we all do that. Unfortunately, we all have a tendency to pick the texts that make us feel good about our religion. And I'm sure he did that as well. It clearly does say in the Quran, there should be no compulsion in religion. Clearly, some Muslims have compelled others, just like Christians have compelled others. So I don't want to whitewash anything. I find the Quran, frankly, not very fun to read.
No.
There's some terrible things in the Quran, but there's also some beautiful things. What I didn't say was I was the World Parliament of Religions in 2004, and one of my highlights was sitting every morning with a text study in the Quran from the most loving, gentle imam you could imagine. And he just loved the text so much, it just came through. And I thought about how tedious some of the Bible studies I've sat through in my life are. He really loved it, made it come alive. But there are those other texts that'll scare you to death. And there's a lot of hellfire and brimstone in the Quran, you know, shape up or you're going to burn for eternity. That's there. But we have our own Revelation, a book of Revelation and others. So we have to think about what is progressive theology? What is progressive understanding of God? I think Muslims are just coming to that, really. We've done critical study of the Bible now for, a century or a little more. They're 600 years, younger than we, right? 600 years ago, we were cutting people's ears off and putting them in the stocks in the Reformation period or shortly thereafter in all kinds of inter-Christian wars. I think Islam needs some more time to mature. I think there will be a group of, well, certainly there are feminist scholars now within Islam that are calling some of the traditions into question. I expect there will be critical studies of the Quran that will say this is how it came to be, rather than assuming that it was dictated verbatim to Muhammad. We used to think that about the Bible, didn't we? That it was dictated directly. We know better now. So
the other thing I would say is that one of the advantages that I found discovered by reading the Quran chronologically is that you can see some of those passages that are fire and brimstone are aimed at the opponents that Muhammad was dealing with. His community and their communities were at loggerheads. And if you read passages in the Hebrew Bible, you see that the Israelites were at loggerheads with the Perizzites, the Jebusites, and all of these other ites. So that kind of self-justification comes out in those texts.
Yep.
If you have a chance, those that have not gone to a mosque service should try to get to one. It really opens your eyes to many things and how the service is and the beauty of the Muslim faith. After the 9/11, the United States scanned all the mosques in the United States for nuclear material. And they were all for 4,000. Well, we're going to find it, because what we have is the Sunni version of what a Muslim is. And that's the one that we've been kind of news-wise indoctrinated in. It really is a different story. And when that 9/11 happened, we had a church member get a bouquet of flowers and take it to the mosque there and try to put it in the church. But the gate was locked because of security at the time of the 9/11, and she left it there. But she had said, I believe in you, and I don't believe in what happened that was you in New York.
Right.
Truly, it's sad that it was only one person. There should have been 1,000 of us there at the gate giving flowers to say, we believe in you.
Mary?
I worshiped at a mosque, and the women went upstairs to the balcony to worship. And, I'm kind of got a chip on my shoulder and ready to get very feminist. And then I realized that, if you're going to pray with your head on the floor, you do not want a man behind you.
Yeah, it's modesty. It's a big thing for them.
Right. And talking to some feminist Muslims, they say that the great thing about hijab, or even of all of the full burqa and all of that, is that you are not evaluated for anything other than your ability to have a decent conversation, because nobody's looking at how beautiful you are or any of these other physical characteristics that dominate our airwaves. And that you are understood and dealt with on the basis of your humanity. And so there are many feminist Muslims who are strong supporters of those, that, and that's all cultural. That there's nothing about any of that in the Quran.
No.
That's all cultural, that again has sort of become universalized in the Muslim world in ways that we think is Quranic. So.
Right.
Well, next week,
Christianity.
Next week, we'll talk about Christianity and all the wars that we've had with each. No, that's not what we're going to talk about.
There'll be some of that, though.
Yeah. But so thank you.
I think Sandy had a question.
We're probably going to not have a video next week, so it will all be much more interactive. Hard to have a video on Christianity in kind of the same way. I think we know our stuff a little bit. So
Sandy,
anyway,
Sandy,
thank you
did
all.
you have a question?
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I was involved in interfaith stuff around the time of the 9/11. And there were a huge group of us that gathered around the mosque. And we made a circle around the mosque at that time.
Wow.
All held hands. So there were people beyond what you were talking about, Mike, one person. There was quite a thing. But I remember at that time, and I was wondering that it must be different now, that there were a lot of people who never met a Muslim, never met a Muslim. And I'm wondering with all the kids, I mean, they all have Muslim friends, for heaven's sake. So I'm hoping that's really making a huge difference. That's
Big
all.
difference.
Yep. Thank you, Sandy.
When you know someone, it makes a big difference.
Yes.
We'll see you all soon. Thank you so much.